overall, I do think there's a chance that Bitcoin can be accepted as a major asset class like a digital gold. Having said that, do I think that the run in Bitcoin and crypto assets recently is anything more than a liquidity run, which is also being seen in the stock market where risk assets are being ballooning to the upside? That's what I do believe is going on right now. A lot of people will point to the spot ETF. A lot of people will point to this. But when it all comes down to it, it's how much money do people have? And we've seen, again, there is so much money in the system, contrary to what really we've been led to believe, right?
With more than 2 decades of trading expertise, Gareth Soloway delves into the recent surge of Bitcoin, which has reached the $57,000 range. Additionally, Soloway will offer a comprehensive market update, analyzing key charts and data sets spanning various markets. On Monday, Bitcoin awoke from a week of sideways trading to jump more than 7% and reach $54,000 for the first time since December 2021. Bitcoin extended its gains Tuesday, touching a more than 2-year high above $57,000. Bitcoin has gained 24% since the ETFs began trading on January 11th. Bitcoin is less than 20% off its November 2021 all-time high of $69,000. Moreover, a famous trader, Peter Brandt, shared a bullish forecast for Bitcoin's future. He predicts a possible rise to $200,000 by the end of the current bull market cycle, projected for August or September 2025. Regarding Bitcoin's technical analysis, Soloway suggests a cautious approach despite recent bullish movements. He identifies critical resistance levels, like the Fibonacci retracement levels, indicating a potential pullback to around $30,000 to $32,000, possibly coinciding with a stock market correction. While the rally continued for cryptos, stocks traded in a holding pattern as investors practiced patience following last week's run-up to new record highs for the S&P and Dow. Many are now awaiting Thursday's PCE index report, a key inflation input into the Federal Reserve's rate-setting decisions, before increasing their exposure to the market. At the closing bell, the S&P and Nasdaq finished in the green, up 0.17% and 0.37% respectively. Soloway questions whether the recent surge in Bitcoin and crypto assets is primarily driven by a liquidity rush, similar to what's happening in the stock market, where risk assets are experiencing significant upward movements. Ready to uncover more insights? Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications always to get our latest content.
The Federal Reserve has tightened rates, which supposedly pulled liquidity back. But then they introduced, there's reverse repo. Reverse repo, if you look at the chart on that, and I don't have it right here, but the chart on reverse repo is topped out. All right, so when banks put money into the Fed, they're storing money at the Fed. When the Fed gives that money back, it's putting liquidity back into the banks. Well, since the lows of October of 2022, when the stock market bottomed, that's when the Fed started returning the money from the reverse repo to the banks, where it was starting to drop. And so there's this real correlation to money flowing in. And we also know that during March of 2023, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, we saw that the Fed put in this emergency loan program. And banks, of course, just like any normal system would do, banks realized they could make a great arbitrage situation by basically borrowing money from the Fed at real cheap levels and then loaning it out for higher interest rates. And now the Fed is going to be ending that on March 11th. So there is a kind of a potential maybe drawdown in liquidity in the system, but it has driven asset prices to ridiculous levels, aka Nvidia, Bitcoin, and some of these other cryptos. Now, looking at Bitcoin, amazing move. The one thing on a technical basis, you can see this channel here, right? We have broken above this, but I'm not convinced yet that we're going to go straight up to all-time highs, mainly because if we look back at our previous all-time high on Bitcoin, we just hit today at the 786 Fibonacci level. So here we can see the Fibonacci retrace. So we did just hit a major technical level here around 57,500, and it should be a resistance point. Now, again, we'll have to see how the liquidity in the stock market goes, but I am a big believer that we will have at least a drawback on Bitcoin to 30 to 32,000, and that should be coinciding with the stock market correction that we should be close to getting. But again, to be honest, I don't know. It's hard to know if it's a tulip mania, right? Or is it actually something that's sustainable with Bitcoin? I think the more people that adopt it and the more institutional money that gets in there, likely it stays around for longer. But I can definitely appreciate your viewpoint. I think multiple viewpoints are always good for investors to hear. when you put all your eggs in one basket, you end up losing a lot of those and going broke very quickly. And so it's not to say that Bitcoin's not a good thing to have in a diversified portfolio, but it needs to be a diversified portfolio. And that goes with anything. I mean, people that are all in on Nvidia or all in on something else, it's never a good idea because again, there's no guarantees in life, right? I mean, you could think it's the best investment in the world, and people thought that at 69,000 on Bitcoin, and it went to 15 and change. So, very wise words, and I can understand that. Again, people have to just remove the blinders and just understand. Now, it doesn't mean Bitcoin won't survive or will survive or whatnot. But again, don't necessarily be like, oh, Larry Fink is all of a sudden a believer. He's not a believer. All he cares about is the money that they're making overall from the ETFs and so forth.
U.S. stocks soared to new highs last week after Nvidia, the third largest company on Wall Street, blew past earnings expectations and bolstered investor optimism on Wall Street. After reporting extraordinary earnings, growth fueled by the artificial intelligence boom, Nvidia reached a new record high, popping 16.4%. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average notched new record highs, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq was within striking distance of its all-time high, reaching November 2021. Soloway points out that among the 11 S&P sectors, only the technology sector has marked new all-time highs from 2022. Other tech stocks also enjoyed a boost. Meta and Amazon were up 3.9% and 3.6% respectively. Other chip makers benefited from Nvidia's good news. Shares of AMD were 10.7% higher on Thursday morning, and Microsoft was 2.4% higher. Soloway suggests a corrective move is imminent, citing overbought markets and overwhelmingly bullish sentiment. Now let's redirect our attention to a video.
Let's take a look at the S&P 500 here. And again, what we could see, this is the S&P 500, and we've been kind of tracking this trend line right up here, right? In fact, we can probably even make it a little bit more exact through these exact highs. And what I love to do is I love to put trend lines in below. And what we could see here is that you have the S&P 500 getting tighter and tighter in what's called a wedge pattern. And again, a wedge pattern tells us that it's consolidating inside of this range, and eventually it will either break out to the upside or to the downside. So again, you can see how tight it has gotten now, where we touched the high end just 3 days ago, 3 trading days ago, and we're now back to the almost the low end here. I'm a believer that I think we're due for a corrective move. The markets are extremely overbought. Sentiment is extremely bullish, and I am ready for a correction here. So I'm going on the side of, and I've positioned my portfolio to the short side here in the coming days and weeks. When we're looking at stocks, we know that at this point it's driven by just a few, right? Nvidia is basically the main one. Microsoft. I mean, we've even lost Apple. I mean, Apple used to be the biggest name for years that would drive the markets, and that's even now down off of its all-time highs. I think it made an all-time high in December. So you can see the stock market's made new all-time highs recently, but Apple has actually come down decently just in the last couple months. So we've seen out of the 11 S&P sectors, only one has made a new all-time high from 2022. That's the technology sector. And these are things that generally the public ignores because the public sees the headline numbers, but a good technical investor and fundamental investor will pay attention to this. And it is alarming how skinny the leadership board has gotten at this point. When I first started, I was a gunslinger, if you will, like all my money in on this or that. And I think a lot of the newer investors that have come in since COVID are very much all in on something, right? But you and me, we've been around the block many times. And the more you get, essentially, the more you get burned, the more you become aware of certain things. And there's a tipping point, right, where you say, okay, yeah, the market could go up another 10%, but it could also drop 50%. And at that point, it's not worth it to be on the long side. It's better to stay in cash or nibble on gold, for instance, or other assets, and just protect yourself. So I think it's an age thing that shows, and I do think a lot of the newer investors will get there eventually. Unfortunately, they'll have to learn some of their lessons.
Since its inception in 2009, Bitcoin has been the cryptocurrency market leader and has gained immense popularity among investors worldwide. Around 95% of Bitcoin addresses are profitable, underlining the strong bullish sentiment in digital assets. This achievement aligns with a significant market rally, where the total market capitalization surged by crossing the $2 trillion milestone. We welcome your insights in the comments section below. If you found this content valuable, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to stay informed. Thank you for joining us on this journey.